It begins with a sound, not the dramatic sound of a scream or the wet, rattling cough of a consumptive patient. It is a much quieter, more deliberate sound. It is the soft, metallic snick of a polished steel instrument being drawn from a velvet-lined case. Imagine you are lying in a bed, your body on fire with fever, your head pounding, your breath coming in ragged gasps. A figure stands over you, silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. This person is not an assailant, not a monster from a nightmare. This is your doctor, and the gleaming instrument in their hand, a tool designed to pierce your flesh and spill your blood, is not a weapon of violence. It is, they assure you, the cure. What if I told you that this terrifying scene was not an isolated incident of medical madness, but the absolute standard of care, the most respected and universally applied medical treatment in the world for over 2,000 years? What if I told you that this single idea, the simple act of opening a vein, held the greatest minds in its thrall, from the philosophers of ancient Greece, to the physicians of the Roman emperors, to the brave doctors of the American Revolution? And what if I told you that this entire, enduring medical edifice was built upon a complete and utter fiction? A fiction so powerful and so persuasive that it led to more pain, more suffering, and more death than perhaps any single disease it was ever meant to treat. Welcome back to Morbid Medicine, the channel that puts history under the microscope. Today, we are undertaking a deep and bloody dissection of a practice that is both fascinating and horrifying. This is the story of bloodletting, the cure-all that killed millions. To understand how such a brutal and seemingly counterintuitive practice could dominate medicine for a span of time that makes modern science look like a mere blip, we must travel back, not just to a different time, but to a different reality, a different way of seeing the human body itself. Our journey begins not in a laboratory, but in the Fertile Crescent and the Nile Delta. The Ebers Papyrus of ancient Egypt, a medical text from around 1550 BCE, contains references to bleeding, seeing it as a way to purge impurities or demonic influences that brought sickness. But this was medicine mixed with magic. For the intellectual foundation of bloodletting, the theory that would elevate it to a science, we must turn to ancient Greece. Here we meet Hippocrates of Kos, a name synonymous with medicine itself. Living in the 4th century BCE, he is rightly hailed as the father of medicine for his revolutionary assertion that diseases were caused by natural processes, not the whims of angry gods. He and his followers gave us the Hippocratic Oath, a foundational text of medical ethics. But they also gave us something far more dangerous, the theory of the 4 humors. This theory was, in its own way, a stroke of genius. It was an attempt to create a unified, logical system for understanding the body. It proposed that every human was a vessel containing 4 essential fluids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a state of perfect balance, of harmony between these fluids. Sickness was simply a state of imbalance, a dyscrasia. One humor had become too abundant or corrupt and was wreaking havoc on the system. If Hippocrates wrote the first draft, it was a Roman physician of Greek ancestry, Galen of Pergamon, who edited it into an unshakable scripture. Galen, practicing in the 2nd century CE, was the undisputed titan of ancient medicine. He was a physician to the gladiators, which gave him a grisly, hands-on education in trauma, wounds, and anatomy. He was ambitious, brilliant, and incredibly arrogant. He became the court physician to Roman emperors, and his word was law. Galen took the humoral theory and supercharged it. He wrote hundreds upon hundreds of treatises, dissecting animals to map the body's systems, and creating a vast, complex, and all-encompassing doctrine that explained every known ailment through the lens of humoral imbalance. He wrote with such authority and in such exhaustive detail that his work became the foundation of all Western and Islamic medicine for the next 1,500 years. After the Roman Empire crumbled, his texts were preserved and revered by Islamic scholars like the great Avicenna, whose Canon of Medicine heavily featured Galenic teachings. When this knowledge was later reintroduced into medieval Europe, it wasn't treated as a theory, it was treated as gospel. To question Galen was heresy, and Galen's gospel stated unequivocally that the most common cause of illness, especially fevers and inflammations, was an overabundance of blood. The prescription was therefore not a suggestion, but a command. The excess must be removed. To truly grasp the staying power of bloodletting, we have to understand the flawed elegance of the humoral system. It was far more than a medical chart. It was a cosmic map of the human condition. Let's start with blood. This was the chief humor associated with the element of air, the warmth and wetness of spring, and the liver. A person dominated by blood was sanguine, characterized by optimism, cheerfulness, and a lust for life. They were the life of the party. But when this humor was in excess, it boiled over, causing fevers, nosebleeds, high blood pressure, and fits of mania. It was seen as the most vital fluid, but also the most volatile. Next was phlegm. Associated with water, the cold and wet of winter, and the brain, it governed the phlegmatic temperament. These were calm, peaceful, thoughtful, and unemotional individuals. They were dependable and stable, but an overabundance of phlegm led to sluggishness, apathy, colds, and respiratory ailments. It was believed to literally clog the spirit and the body. Then came yellow bile. This humor was tied to fire, the heat and dryness of summer, and the spleen. It produced the choleric personality, fiery, ambitious, and decisive, but also prone to anger, irritability, and aggression. An excess of yellow bile was blamed for jaundice, gallstones, and fits of uncontrollable rage. Finally, we have the most infamous of the humors, black bile. Linked to the element earth, the cold and dry of autumn, and the gallbladder, it was responsible for the melancholic disposition. In balance, this made a person thoughtful, introspective, creative, and sensitive. But when black bile was in excess, it produced the dreaded state of melancholia, a profound, soul-crushing depression, filled with irrational fears, delusions, and a complete loss of hope. A physician saw themselves as a master gardener, tending to these internal fluids. Their diagnostic tools were the patient's pulse, the color and smell of their urine, and the position of the stars. The zodiac man, a staple illustration in medical texts, was a grotesque roadmap showing which astrological sign ruled which body part. Bleeding a patient for a headache was best done from a vein in the arm when the sign for the head, Aries, was not an ascension, lest you draw the vital spirits away from the afflicted area. This layer of complexity and arcane knowledge only solidified the physician's authority. It was a complete system, wrong about everything, but internally consistent. Armed with this flawed but unshakable theory, the medical practitioners of the past developed a ghastly and specialized toolkit. To journey into a pre-modern infirmary is to journey into a chamber of horrors, so let's examine the instruments of this bloody trade. First and foremost is venesection, the direct cutting of a vein, and its signature tool, the lancet. The lancet was a small, sharp-bladed knife, but it was also a symbol of the physician's power. They were often exquisite objects with handles of polished ivory, silver, or tortoiseshell kept in plush cases. The procedure became a ritual. The patient, often sitting in a chair, would be given a staff to grip, tensing their muscles and making the veins of the arm swell. A tourniquet or bandage would be tied above the elbow. The physician, or more commonly the barber surgeon, would select a vein, often the cephalic vein in the middle of the elbow. Then came the quick, sharp prick of the blade. Blood, dark and rich, would arc into a waiting bleeding bowl. These bowls were often made of pewter or ceramic, with lines etched on the inside to measure the ounces being drained. The quantity was everything. A carefully considered prescription based on the patient's age, constitution, the severity of the illness, and the time of year. For those areas the lancet couldn't easily reach, or for a different therapeutic effect, there was the gruesome duo of scarification and cupping. The star of this show was the scarificator, a marvel of morbid engineering. It was a small brass box that fit in the palm of the hand. Inside, a set of anywhere from 10 to 20 small blades were mounted on a spring-loaded bar. The box would be placed on the skin, a lever would be triggered, and in an instant the blades would snap forward, inflicting a series of parallel gashes. It was praised for its speed and efficiency. Following this assault, heated glass cups were placed over the wounds. The cooling air inside created a powerful vacuum, sucking the flesh upwards and drawing blood from the cuts to fill the glass dome. This was wet cupping, and a patient's back might be covered in a dozen of these blood-filled pods, a truly macabre sight. Then there was the living tool, nature's own phlebotomist, the leech. The use of the medicinal leech, Hippocrates medicinales, became a global industry. These creatures were perfectly designed for the task. Their three-jawed mouths make a Y-shaped incision, and their saliva is a complex chemical cocktail. It contains an anesthetic, so the bite doesn't hurt too much, and a powerful anticoagulant called hirudin, which keeps the blood flowing freely. The leech would drink until it was bloated and fell off, consuming up to 10 times its own weight. Leeches could be applied to places too sensitive for the blade, the temples, the gums, even the eyelids. The demand became so high in the 18th and 19th centuries that it sparked leech mania. An entire profession of leech collectors, often poor rural women, would wade into bogs and ponds, using their own legs as bait. Leeches were farmed, stored in ornate apothecary jars, and sold for exorbitant prices. In the 1830s, France was importing over 40 million leeches annually to bleed its populace. Finally, for the most dire of circumstances, there was arteriotomy, the cutting of an artery. Usually performed on the temples to treat madness or apoplexy, it was exponentially more dangerous than venesection and notoriously difficult to stop. It was a true kill or cure measure, a sign of absolute medical desperation. From the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution, bloodletting was not just medicine, it was a cultural obsession. This was the era of heroic medicine, where the severity of the treatment was thought to reflect the severity of the disease. And there is no greater hero or anti-hero of this movement than Dr. Benjamin Rush of Philadelphia. Rush was a towering figure in early American history. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a friend to Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, a social reformer who advocated for the abolition of slavery and better treatment for the mentally ill. But in medicine, he was a zealot. He believed that all fevers stemmed from a single cause, an overstimulation and tension in the blood vessels. His solution was simple and terrifying: bleed the patient until this tension was relieved. His theories were put to the ultimate test during the horrific yellow fever epidemic that devastated Philadelphia in 1793. The city became a charnel house. Rush, to his immense credit, refused to flee. He stayed and treated hundreds of patients, working to the point of collapse, but his treatment was brutal. He advocated draining huge quantities of blood, far more than was traditional. He wrote of taking 80 to 100 ounces from a patient over a few days. That's 5 to 6 pints. He believed that when a patient fainted from blood loss, it was a sign the cure was taking effect. In his own words, he was governed by a single theory and rejected any evidence that contradicted it. While he saw himself as a savior, many now believe his aggressive bleeding regimens turned a deadly epidemic into an even greater catastrophe. This was not just an American madness. In France, physician François-Joseph Victor Broussais was even more extreme. He believed nearly all diseases were a form of gastroenteritis and prescribed antiphlogistic treatment leeches. Dozens upon dozens of leeches, applied to the abdomen, combined with a starvation diet. His influence was so immense that for a time, it was difficult to find a patient in a Parisian hospital who wasn't covered in the slimy, blood-sucking creatures. The anonymous victims of these practices number in the uncounted millions, but the stories of the famous and powerful drive home the horror. In 1685, King Charles II of England, the Merry Monarch, collapsed. His 14 court physicians descended upon him. Day one began with the letting of a pint of blood from his arm. This was followed by scarification and cupping, purging with laxatives and forced vomiting. Day two, more bleeding. They shaved his head and applied caustic blistering agents to his scalp. They fed him potions made from powdered human skull and stones from a goat's stomach. Day after day, the assault continued, a grotesque catalog of every misguided therapy known to man, all while they continued to intermittently bleed him. He died in agonizing pain. His doctors, in their desperation, had killed him with their cure. But the ultimate poster child for the tragedy of bloodletting is George Washington. In December 1799, the retired president contracted what his doctors called sinus trachealis, a severe throat infection. It was likely acute epiglottitis, a condition that causes the flap at the top of the windpipe to swell, leading to suffocation. It is a true medical emergency. His doctors, respected men of their time, rushed to his side and deployed their primary weapon. The ordeal began with a bleeding of about 12 ounces. When he didn't improve, they bled him again, and again, and again. His wife Martha and his secretaries watched in horror. One of the three doctors, a younger man named Elisha Dick, argued against the final bleeding, pleading that it would only weaken the president further. He was overruled by his more experienced colleagues who were beholden to tradition. In less than 24 hours, they drained George Washington of an estimated 3.75 liters of blood, more than half the blood in his entire body. They bled a man who was suffocating, robbing his already oxygen-starved body of the very cells needed to transport what little air he could get. As he lay dying, weak and exsanguinated, he whispered instructions for his own burial. He had faced down the British Empire, but he could not survive his own doctors. How does a dogma that lasted for 2 millennia finally die? It died not with a bang, but with the quiet scratching of a pen on a ledger. It was murdered by mathematics. The assassin was a brilliant French physician named Pierre-Charles Alexander Louis. In the 1820s and 30s, in the hospitals of Paris, Louis began to do something that seems obvious to us but was utterly revolutionary for his time. He started counting. He was tired of medical eminence and ancient authority. He wanted proof. He created what he called the numerical method. In his landmark study, he took 77 patients suffering from pneumonia and recorded everything. He noted when they were bled, how much blood was taken, and how long their illness lasted. Crucially, he recorded how many of them lived and how many died. When he tabulated the results, the conclusion was a stake through the heart of heroic medicine. He found that the patients who were bled aggressively did no better than those who were bled less. In fact, his data showed that extensive bloodletting was associated with a higher mortality rate. For the first time, bloodletting had been weighed on the scales of statistics and been found wanting. Louis had given birth to the clinical trial, and medicine would never be the same. Louis's work created the first cracks in the dam. Then, a flood of new scientific discoveries washed the entire rotten structure away. The development of the microscope allowed scientists like Rudolf Virchow to develop cell theory, proving that the body was made of tiny living units and that disease was a malfunction at the cellular level, not a sloshing of humors. Then Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, with their meticulous experiments, proved the germ theory of disease, demonstrating that invisible microbes were the cause of infections. Suddenly, physicians had a new, more accurate map of illness. Fever wasn't an excess of blood. It was the body's response to a bacterial or viral invasion. Removing blood didn't remove the cause. It only weakened the patient's ability to fight. The logic of bloodletting didn't just seem ineffective. It became nonsensical. The practice lingered like a ghost for a few more decades, but its reign was over. The lancet was replaced by the scalpel, the leech by the antibiotic. The 2,000-year history of bloodletting is the greatest cautionary tale in the annals of medicine. It is a morbid story of how the human desire to heal, when yoked to a flawed theory and an unquestioning faith in authority, can create a system of unimaginable harm. It reminds us that good intentions are no defense against bad science, and that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves in the name of helping others. Today, the sound of that lancet being drawn from its case has been replaced by the quiet hum of a centrifuge, the beep of a cardiac monitor, the focused silence of a laboratory. A specific, controlled version of bloodletting therapeutic phlebotomy is used for a handful of very specific blood disorders, its use guided by precise measurement and scientific understanding. It is the final, ironic echo of its brutal ancestor, a testament not to the old ways, but to how far we have come. The next time you feel unwell, be grateful that your doctor reaches for a prescription pad and not for a blade. Thank you for joining us on this excursion into the blood-soaked past. If your intellectual appetite for the gruesome and ghastly has not been fully sated, be sure to subscribe to Morbid Medicine and ring the plague bell so you are the first to be infected by our next episode. Until then, stay curious and stay healthy.